Hello and welcome to episode 20 of the Medical Device Success Podcast. I am Ted Newell, your host, and this is also a video cast. This is part 2 of a 3-part series on virtual trade shows and alternatives. And we've made this 3-part series a video cast as well because some of the material we're sharing is, I think, better communicated in a video cast. However, I think you will understand the podcast as well quite well. So I'm collaborating to produce these video casts with Lisa Bixel of Bixel Medical Marketing Group and her crew. And today we are interviewing 2 leaders in the healthcare trade show and event ecosystem. I think you'll find their information interesting and valuable. And on a humorous note, one thing you'll learn about in this video cast is that you can have a pigeon in your virtual booth. More on that later. Finally, I'd like to say that unfortunately there was a storm going through Pennsylvania when we were doing this video cast, and that storm interfered with the quality of the video. So you're going to see a lot of pixelation and an occasional freeze up. However, the audio is good. So continue to listen. I think you'll enjoy it. Let's get on to the subject. Welcome to the second of our 3-part series about trade shows, virtual trade shows, events, and possible alternatives. And today we are very fortunate to have leaders of the healthcare exhibition and event ecosystem with us to discuss these issues. And I'd like to introduce these people right now. So first of all, we have Jeannie Wirt, who's the Director of Exhibition Management at Siemens Healthineers, and she's also the board president of the Healthcare Convention and Exhibitors Association, the HCEA. So Jeannie's bringing to us some real interesting experience as somebody that has to deal with this on the company side, but also has a lot of insight from the entire community side, being the president of the HCEA. Welcome, Jeannie.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Glad you're here. Thank you for being here. And we also have Mike Ellery, who is the Chief Creative Officer of Sparks Marketing Corporation. And Sparks is a world leader in exhibition and event management. And of course, they've had to do make quite a change, and we're going to talk about that because they're not setting up exhibits right now or designing the hardware. They're doing it virtually. So, Mike, it's really great to have you here today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And then finally, we have Lisa Bixel, CEO of Bixel Medical Marketing Group. And Bixel Medical Marketing Group is I made a mistake the other day. I said it was an agency, but really it's an organization that helps lead the marketing and sales efforts for small to medium-sized companies, frequently startups. So she is really dealing with challenges with organizations that have tight budgets, working in a totally new environment. Lisa, it's really great to have you here.
Thanks for having me back. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. And she said having her back, I've collaborated with Lisa on several podcasts and just really impressed with her team and the work that they do. So a little bit of background for those that did not see the previous podcast video cast is that we have a 3-part series, and this is the second of the 3 parts. In the first part, we went into some depth about virtual trade shows, and we had a long agenda. It was a long program. Today's should be shorter, discussing a lot of the issues related to virtual trade shows, events, and alternatives. And Lisa and her crew really helped with that, and it was a terrific program. But today, like I said, we're talking to people that are actually in the field dealing with this day in and day out. And that's why we're here today, to get an outside perspective on these problems and potential solutions. And then next week, we're putting together several doctors that will be in part 3. We're going to talk to doctors about how they view this situation and what it means to them, whether they're attending something virtually or they'd like to attend something in person. So to get started today, I would just like to, one thing I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the HCEA to get started, the Healthcare Exhibitors Association. So Jeannie, can you just tell us a little bit about this association and why it's important that medical device companies, life science companies belong to it?
Sure. HCEA is a trade association that is comprised of associations, corporate entities like a Siemens, and vendor partners as well, like Sparks. So together, we form a very informed body on the landscape overall in the live event space, but with specific regard to healthcare. So everyone in this membership organization is focused on the execution of events in the healthcare space, whether that's pharmaceutical, biotech, biopharma, med device, you name it. And so when we are looking through how the industry is performing, we're looking at it specifically in that regard. So we're looking for data and at data sets in regards to how healthcare in the event space is performing in general. And it's a very tight group. So you have a lot of informed legacy veteran participants who are very knowledgeable in the space and would consider our members to be experts in the field of healthcare exhibition and events. That it's a go-to when you're talking about this arena.
And what does somebody gain by belonging to this organization?
It really expands your network. And for those of you that are working in the corporate space, it's typically competitive, right? So we're not necessarily going to approach our competitors to say, hey, this is really great. Can you take me through how you did this? You're really thinking with your corporate hat on. In HCEA, you have the ability to form those relationships, have dialogue and discussion on what's a best demonstrated practice from the industry overall. And it is not from the corporate perspective. It is, how are we handling regulations that impact what we do from a marketing perspective? How are we tackling GDPR with specific regard to healthcare events? How are we checking and regulating and working within the new set of pharma codes? So it's a very unique language that is spoken with regard to healthcare activities. And it gives you the freedom to be able to say, this is the best demonstrated process. This is how it's being handled across. And it allows us to create some standards that are unique to our environment specifically. Because they don't always translate into other fields. It's a different B2B, B2C environment than your typical.
And so if a company belonged to the organization, it might be their event manager or their director of marketing manager that was participating as the representative of the company.
Correct. We have everything from event managers to exhibit managers, heads of marketing and communications managers, all fit into that spectrum. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Lisa, I understand you belong to this organization, correct?
I do. I've actually first joined in the 90s, so quite some time. And I've kept my membership off and on over the years, mostly, again, like we were just talking about, depending on the role I was at my organization. When I was, head of marketing and sales, I would generally have my events manager join HCA, and we'd stay plugged in that way.
Okay. Well, great. So for all listeners out there, find out if your company belongs. If they don't, they should look into it because it's a great resource. It may make you more competitive when you're out participating in events, whether they're virtual or whether they're in person. Okay, so that's the HCEA. Very good. So that segues us into, the landscape right now. I really don't have to go into too much detail on this, but trade shows for the most part, national, regional trade shows, are pretty much shut down through the end of the year. It could be into early next year. One thing Lisa made me aware of in our last video cast and podcast is that some state organizations are still having their programs, especially if they're later in the year. They still are scheduled. And that's what, Lisa, because they can drive there, right?
Right. And that's what we're hearing is that if it's a regional conference and no one, really has to go to an airport, get on a plane and fly to it, that those things are still starting to be considered, at least opening up again. Of course, when you get there, good social distancing practices, the masks and, sitting apart are all being maintained. But again, as long as I could drive there, if I'm a physician or a nurse or any kind of a healthcare professional, then those are starting to be at least communicated as being live events again.
it'll be interesting to see how that works out. And I don't know if Mike and Jeannie, if you saw the Philadelphia Inquirer this last week in the Sunday paper, the first page article, I think it was first page, there's a little thing down the bottom, but they have an article about the fact that for Philadelphia, conventions are $7 billion
Wow.
in local revenue. And so they were talking about trying to get some of that back on track and how much money that the Philadelphia Convention Center has invested in air recirculation systems, special coverings on things that you would handle like doorknobs, bathroom doors, and so on that are antimicrobial. And they even have on the escalators, they're building in these ultraviolet light systems. So as the escalator handle goes around, it gets hit with this ultraviolet light and sanitized before it comes back out.
Wow.
So it's constantly being so the money they're putting into this, but and I think there's probably some industries where this will probably be fine. I think when we start talking about medical and we're talking about doctors coming, one of the issues that Lisa and I and Lauren discussed last week is that these doctors have a real issue about the possibility that if they go someplace and become ill or exposed, and they maybe not even ill, but they're exposed, they come home, they're quarantined, they can't go to their office, they can't participate in their office practice, they put everybody under pressure, they can't work at the hospital, be on call. So there's a lot of stakeholders that lose out if a doctor becomes exposed and or infected. So and that affects their income, the income of the practice. There's a big ripple effect. So our particular stakeholders, if we're talking about the doctors in one case here, it's a real issue. So let's start off, Jeannie, with you. Looking at this from your role as the president of the HCEA, how do you think this is affecting medical societies?
So there's a huge impact financially, and it's that article in the Inquirer was interesting. Overall, exhibitions contributes $101 billion to the GDP. So it is this absolute machine in terms of economic drivers in the US. And that's just looking at the US, right? Globally, the number exponentially increases. From a healthcare perspective, those investments are significant as well. And you have kind of key corridors where shows are targeted to take place based on innovations in science themselves. So where you have a lot of pharma companies, where you have a lot of med devices, you tend to see a lot of healthcare trade shows. So those local economies are feeling the pinch, just as economies are all over from this lack of business. But you're seeing the downturn in revenue generation from a corporate perspective as well, right? I think on average overall, it's around a 14% decrease right now in terms of revenue generation, and healthcare certainly makes up a part of that. From an association standpoint, healthcare associations are like any other association, which is like any other business. You need those moments that generate revenue in order to continue. And a good majority of those thrive on their annual event. They are a significant part of their revenue generation model. And typically that can run anywhere from 50 to 70% of their annual revenue, which offsets then their operating expense. So the minute that you take away that annual event, you really have put them in financial jeopardy for long-term success, right? So it's definitely problematic. A lot are really looking to pivot and how they change that model, how they find new streams for revenue in order to stay viable. And so there's going to be a lot of, I think, as we continue in this space for some time, a lot of exploration of how do we change the model? How do we do this differently? How do we find new waypoints for revenue in order to stay successful? And it'll be interesting to see of those which make the transition quickly and which really come out on top. So,
how do you think this is affecting their decision making as they move into this virtual situation?
So, I think, and all of us, and even myself as board president for HCEA, you kind of find yourself in this decision making tree of What are the risks? What are the financial ramifications? At the start of COVID, it was very easy to negotiate your way out with force majeure, right? It was new. We didn't know enough about it. It was happening very quickly. Everybody went into shelter in place or quarantine or some degree of isolation. The longer this goes on, the more difficult that becomes because of this overwhelming loss of revenue, right? At a city level, at a state level. So local governments, state governments are becoming less and less willing to say, yes, we'll let you walk away from this without penalty because it's impacting their economic stability. So you have to determine, if I'm postponing my event, if I'm canceling it, if I'm trying to schedule in the future, what's going to be a viable date and what are my potential financial ramifications? Not only are we facing the loss of revenue, but potentially penalties on top of that. So you have less money coming in and potentially more money going out, which we all know, even from balancing our own checkbooks, is not a recipe for success.
Nope.
So yeah, right. We have to live within our means. It really then is going to determine what those programs look like as they move forward. How much money are they going to have in order to build a successful event? And this is important because they really thrive on exhibitor contribution, and everybody's feeling the pinch of COVID. So your exhibitor sponsors maybe don't have the money to invest right now because they're also feeling the strains of the economic impact. You aren't getting maybe as much in terms of membership fees as you typically would have. So all of these are starting to compound. Virtual right now gives everybody a little bit of relief because there's no overwhelming operational costs when you talk about executing the event, right? So it takes some dollars in expense off the table right away. But we all thrive in a face-to-face environment, and it's not the same experience. And this is what's going through the back of everyone's head. How do we maintain until we can get to a space where we can effectively have a hybrid event or be back together, and what will back together look like? And when we're back together, how much is that going to cost us to safely execute an event? COVID is like the new green movement, right? When being sustainable and environmentally friendly really became a thing, it was very expensive to do, right? Very expensive to have biodegradable materials, not have water bottles. And as that continued and manufacturing kind of caught up, it became more affordable. This is the next wave of that. So in order to be health and safety compliant, you have all of these additional measures like UVD lighting, hand sanitizer, temperature stations, physicians on call. That's new expense that they didn't have before. And that also has to be paid for. So I think for some, they're probably going to look to continue to postpone. Those that are being proactive are going to add virtual elements, and they're doing it very proactively. As this continues, it will become more and more difficult for exhibitors and corporate partners to flip on a dime from live to virtual. There's not enough time in there, especially in healthcare from a regulatory perspective. You can't churn out content in less than 4 weeks' time that is compliant and satisfactory from a regulatory standpoint. They're going to have to kind of continue to evolve quickly and really be proactive in their thought process.
So as you've seen this develop and you're getting feedback from your membership, have you seen some companies, or let's say societies, let's start with societies, but have you seen some societies adapt better than others?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some have transitioned very quickly and have been very complete. From my personal perspective, I think the ones that have been the most successful thus far have been very transparent with their advisory boards. They're actively engaging with their exhibitors to say what's working for you, what's not working, how can we deliver a mutually beneficial experience. So they're taking that feedback and they're integrating it into their planning process. And those seem to go a long way. Others where it's, we'll let you know, we'll have information for you in a couple of weeks, we're still trying to figure it out. There's mounting frustration, and it simply gets too late. It becomes too late for those exhibitors to participate effectively, and they don't. So it's minimizing the experience and therefore the revenue. It's kind of a vicious cycle.
Yeah, I typically go to a meeting every year in Europe called the ESCRS. It's held in early to mid-September. and they just, like a week ago, sent out their exhibitor information. And each time they send it out, it's updated a little bit more, and they give you a little bit more information. So every few days as they continue to promote what they're doing. But it is not good news, especially for small and medium.
Yeah, even for large participants. I don't know if Ted froze there, but I'll kind of jump in.
Yeah.
So it's definitely kind of a trickle down effect in terms of information. And I think just setting expectations on timelines is helpful. Everybody understands we're kind of learning as we go along, and we're creating and cultivating and curating as we go along. It's just much more difficult.
Well, I think we all froze. I think we all froze here, and it's because for the listeners, 3 of us have pretty wild thunderstorms going through the area, and who knows how that's affecting us. But let's go back to what you were just saying, Jeannie.
I was filling while we were waiting for you to come back, Ted.
She was doing the song and dance. Yeah, she was a master.
Yeah, I think, it's hard. They're really quickly trying to put a program together. It's a learning curve for all of us. And I think that's especially true in healthcare. And not to dismiss my own industry, but I feel like healthcare is always a little bit behind when you think about how we push content, the technology that we use. We're just not as sexy on the front end. It takes us a couple of years to catch up to everybody else. And that's typically because the focus is on scientific innovation, and that's where our investment goes. So, with COVID, you had this immediate, our content has to be digital and it has to be highly engaging, and we were not prepared for that. And I think that's true too from an association standpoint. So everybody's piecing it together as quickly as they can in order to be successful.
Yeah, I think everyone's on this learning curve. The associations also, they don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, so they're just not saying anything. And we're finding quite a few of our clients are getting a little frustrated with it. They've invested this money in this upcoming event, but they don't actually know what they're getting for the money they've already paid. And that's leading to some frustration, I think, and understandable from both sides also. So
yeah, I think that's true because again, from an association perspective, like you said, it's a business like we all are running, and so you've got to understand they're holding out as long as they can to make a decision. Can I possibly ease into a more normal approach to COVID environment for my meeting? And so you don't blame them for holding out as long as they can before they make that go, no go decision, or it's going to be virtual, or it's going to be a hybrid, or whatever their circumstances are. And there's a lot of considerations. And I think, earlier in the spring when we were, kind of pontificating about what it's going to be like, we now have had, a few weeks, at least I'd say, probably over the summer, June, July, now into August, where we're seeing some actual events take place. And I think there's also a mad scramble from a society and an industry perspective where we're like, well, that didn't go well. What do we need to do differently? And so, if you made the decision you're going to go virtual, great. Well, now let's do it better though than that thing we just attended last week. And it has ramifications. And there is just sort of this frenzy that we're in, I think.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
but also in the virtual world, there's been some pretty epic fails as far as, really beautifully put together content and really large corporations who've just missed some of the details and no one's been able to access their virtual event, during the opening keynote. So again, there's everyone's very sort of trepidatious about how to move forward. And I think everyone understands why. There's good examples out there. So,
yeah.
And just as far as timing goes too, just so from our point of view, we're building virtual events for people, and we're recommending 12 to 14 weeks in development.
Wow.
Put together, yeah, and that's
a long lead time. I mean, not to say that that's not what you need, but I'm just thinking in terms of even some of our clients where we haven't started yet and the program is fast approaching.
Right.
I don't think I've got enough of a buffer in there. So that's great insight.
Yeah, no, it's again, if people are wanting to do something engaging, unique with really well produced content, you need that amount of time to get all that together and test,
Sure.
that it's accessible and everything works. So there's a lot of that stress testing.
Wow, that's sobering.
Yep.
So, Jeannie, I'm going to make you put your Siemens hat on.
Sure.
And looking at your role at Siemens, what has the approach been to this challenge? Because you've got meetings and events that you have to participate all over the world. Is it a defensive approach? Have you been agile? What do you think?
I would say we're trying to be as agile as we can. I think the longer this continues, we'll probably become more aggressive in our approach. And this is speaking purely with my corporate hat on and my HCEA hat off. Everybody is really pressing to see the return on investment, right? And I would tell you, while we've had some great virtual events and we participated in some great virtual events, that roadmap of clearly is the return on investment there for us yet? I don't think it really is. So there are key things that we will look for as we continue down this path. And when you think about it from an education perspective, everybody says content is king. When I think about it from a corporate standpoint and am I delivering value to my company, I would tell you data is king. And I'm going to be more complimentary to a show with the more data that I get. So, and that's, I think, going to be a breaking point for a lot of companies, small or large, as they continue, is they really want that transparency to data. And it's quite honestly, it's not a new argument from a participant standpoint. We have been asking for years of, if you're doing a heat map at the show, can you share your data with me? If you're capturing this, can you share your data with me? And this is just a whole nother level on that corporate perspective of, we know you're capturing this data. Why aren't you sharing it with me? So that, I think, is going to be the rub as this continues. So, and that will force companies to be more aggressive in how they approach events, and not just Siemens, any company.
Now, were you involved in any of the work regarding the Siemens exhibit at the ECR in Vienna?
Yeah, a little bit. We have a very large team both here in the US and in Germany, and it's a team approach. Yep.
How did you get any feedback as to how that went? Because that's a pretty, as large meetings go, that's a pretty early meeting in the virtual world.
Yeah, it really was. I think everybody is very proud of the output for Siemens for ECR. And realistically, all of that was pulled together within 5 weeks' time, which is nothing short of a miracle. And to Mike's point, you think about timing for execution of these events, 12 to 14 weeks is right on the money. That's the ideal time scenario. And that's just from a programming standpoint. That has nothing to do with us pulling together content, getting it approved through regulatory, legal, compliance in every possible country where this is going to be, seen. So we, felt like it was pretty successful. ECR is a great example of an organization that worked with their exhibitors to understand how to partner well in this new environment. And we appreciated that very much. So it definitely helped create a beneficial experience.
So for the listeners, the ECR is the European Radiology meeting, and it's a big meeting. If it was an in-person meeting, it'd be huge.
Yeah, what is the typical attendance? I know RSNA claims to be one of the world's largest medical meetings at I think about 55,000. So ECR's got to be a close, in the radiology world, that's probably number 2, right?
It is number 2. I think they're usually around 35,000. So in attendance in Vienna. So yeah, it's a big show.
Well, congratulations for making a quick transition and at least getting something out of that show.
Thanks. I think some of the team is still recovering from that one, but yeah, we were happy with it.
They're probably sleeping in. They're not recovering from drinks or anything because they weren't there to have any drinks. But
Great.
So now we're going to change gears a little bit here and go ask Mike a couple questions. But you're a major provider of event solutions, and of course, in the past, it's been typically in terms of hardware, hard exhibits that get erected on a big trade show floor. So you also have a view, and you've made a couple comments already related to societies and industry. From 30,000 feet, what insights do you have, as you look at this whole environment?
just to build on what Jeannie was saying, that the more successful activations that we've done in healthcare recently have been with the associations that are willing to open up their platform a little bit and let people do custom things inside of that. You know, there are a lot of these event platforms out there, virtual platforms out there that can host a series of very generic presences, I guess, for the sponsors. And the ones that have been most successful, the ones who've had the best feedback, are those associations who are willing to allow, take that presence and take it to another place and create a custom experience that someone else, a third party, has built on behalf of that sponsor or that exhibitor. So we're seeing that across the board. We're seeing in other industries as well, people having a virtual presence and then being able to plug in whatever they want to plug in, links to other resources, links to their websites, links to virtual environments we've created, really does start to create a value proposition for people to attend that portion of the event. Yeah, another thing we've seen that's been very successful is incentivizing people to actually attend that portion of the event. Clearly, in healthcare, there are a lot of regulatory issues around that, but there are certain ways I think that could be incorporated more into these platforms also.
Well, that's interesting. So that's not unlike having a physical booth, you know, where you're trying to build traffic, and you might give away a book, a clinical book, or a patient model or something like that might be appropriate. But they're doing that virtually now.
Right.
Yeah. Lunch and learns are very in vogue right now, where you're sending a voucher or you're sending a lunchbox. So that's the alternative.
And Lisa was talking about an organization that was sending steak dinners to people.
Yeah, Eat Engage. Have you all heard of Eat Engage?
No.
So they're actually now a partner of ours. We've formed an alliance actually just this week, and you know, when it comes to a medical event, you know, we're accustomed to lunch and learns, dinner symposia, medical advisory boards, and the like. Well, you know, you're competing for just something a little more unique, and yet also trying to make that seem like it emulates that in-person rapport that you can build with a physician or nurse or administrator. So Eat Engage, what you do is, you know, you schedule your go-to-meeting, your webinar, whatever your platform is, and you get in touch with the Eat Engage folks, and they offer up to each of the attendees a menu in their local market of different restaurants and different foods. And so at the time that you're about ready to start your program virtually, you know, the doorbell rings for them, and they get a nice hot meal of a restaurant in their neighborhood, and they're literally eating what you provided them while you're going through slides and having a discussion. So it's the next best way to kind of replicate again that kind of a dinner symposium or dinner, just a business dinner.
That's great.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Yeah, I know. It's brilliant.
But so Lisa, staying with you, anything to add from the standpoint of small companies, you know, and startups in terms of this new environment?
You know, sadly, yeah, because, you know, Jeannie, I think your insights are so incredibly valuable about the woes of the societies or the associations in their situation. But I also feel like it has to be recognized that you can't, you know, pass the buck, right? It's like, because you're hurting doesn't mean I'm going to be price gouged to support you and supplement that loss of revenue by paying an exorbitant fee to be an exhibitor if I don't find that there's enough value in the package to do so. And so I feel like from a small, you know, device or biotech pharma company standpoint, or even mid-size, you know, I might be forced to, as marketing leader, think about an alternative. And that's painful. I mean, I want to support my societies for sure, but I also have to look out for my best interest. If I don't have the dollars, or if I'm going to pay a nice fee to be virtually at some program, but I don't get the visibility out of it, I'm going to be forced to think, okay, what else can I do? You know, how else might I band together with maybe, again, synergistic companies that work in the same area of mine? Maybe, you know, we don't compete with one another, but, you know, the doctors who we target are the same doctors. And so maybe pulling together 3 or 4 companies we start to develop our own educational curriculum. And, it's a lot more visibility for me as one of the contributors to that than supporting a society in a virtual trade show realm. So I do think that, like it or not, and I know we don't necessarily like it, that this is pushing us all to do things we don't necessarily want to do, but out of necessity, we're going to have to consider it.
Mm-hmm. And I would tell everyone the first right step to take always is to reach out to your association, whether it's you as the agency or the individual company, or it's 2 or 3 companies who are finding themselves in the same position, saying, hey, now more than ever, you need a corporate advisory board. We're here. We're willing to do the work. We're willing to give you these insights. We've done however many shows this time over. And so we can give you these insights to deliver a better experience. We have an obligation to do that, right? And in healthcare in particular, your association is giving you that credibility and authenticity with your customer. It's a simple fact. And we never want to stray from that, but sometimes we have to have that conversation and hope that it goes well. And I think most are amenable, but we're all overwhelmed. That is the common denominator here.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and Ted, I know last week in our part 1 of this series, you had gone to a program where it was interesting the way that they handled it. And I thought it won't work for all these different types of shows. And certainly the society couldn't do this for their big annual event necessarily. But, it was a very, it was a small group, 150, I think you said you had. And they sort of leveled the playing field no matter what your sponsor level was. You had these basic foundational elements of numbers of, materials that you could upload for playing and downloading of brochures, and the package included, which to me was the sweetest thing that they could have done, was access to the providers. So, you were guaranteed to have, what was it, Ted, a couple of appointments?
We were guaranteed to have 5 email introductions to people so we sent them, out of the entire list of attendees, we sent them a list of about 10 or 15 people that we thought were really aligned with what we wanted to talk about. And they gave us email introductions to 5 of them. And then they also had a speed networking program that was really effective during their breaks, and we met several people in the speed networking that turned into leads. So, and finally, they gave us a 10-minute presentation to all the attendees. So,
so again, not appropriate
meeting, but very, very effective. I think it was a good investment.
Couldn't happen with ECR or RSNA for sure, but those kind of out of the box valuable elements should be maybe explored. However it could be managed on that particular level. And I say it couldn't work on RSNA level, but what if you go after a particular specialty? It's radiology, but maybe it's breast radiologists or something like that, and you start to break the group down in different segments, and that allows you some more latitude in how you might be a little bit more intimate with them in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, really quickly here, I'm going to share my screen. If it's going to, previews unknown. That's interesting. So this is the penalty for upgrading to Catalina. It doesn't know what I want to share. So I guess let's see. I guess I'm not going to do that. Okay. What I was going to share you is the pricing for the CSCRS program that's in Europe. And you'll find this interesting, Mike. To have your own virtual booth, you have to be platinum level, and that is 189,000 euros.
Yep.
So you have to give them 189,000 euros before you can even be allowed to have a virtual booth.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I think that is crazy.
I mean,
yeah, and I will tell you at the HCEA level, that's something that we're looking at. I've heard from so many people lately across all of the sectors of healthcare of, hey, somebody needs to step in at some point, because even for the big players, $180,000, I would think twice.
Yeah, question about it. Again, you understand the motivation, right? Someone's got, they're bleeding and they want to stop the bleeding. I get it, but we're all bleeding. So it doesn't quite seem like that just gets passed along, Mike, I think you were saying something, and I think I might have cut you off.
No. I mean, it just makes me confused, I guess, as to how they see this as being sustainable. You know, there's going to have to be a value proposition they bring to the table. You know, otherwise people are going to start looking at other options, whether it's their own proprietary event or banding with others, like you were saying, teaming up with the 2 or 3 other partners, and creating something else, because there has to be some value to the sponsor, to the exhibitor. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it's
As an example, my client, a French company, will not go to the ESCRS this year. They would typically budget. We did the math. My client and I did the math the other day, and I wouldn't be surprised that he spends between booth space, all shipping, blah blah blah, and people being there. He's a small company, maybe a 20-foot inline, and probably 15,000 euros would be spent in that meeting, and in the local area, restaurants, hotels. But he will not go this year. So they've lost a 20-foot inline. I'm sure they're going to lose all the small exhibits and so on. So anyway, let's move on here a second, and let's talk about the differences between like an in-person trade show and a virtual trade show. Now, Jeannie, a minute ago, you mentioned one of the real important ones is you don't have that human interaction that goes on, that is so important from networking, from so many standpoints. Any other thoughts you have on the difference between in-person and virtual?
Yeah. I think everybody right now is kind of in that exploratory phase of what's the secret sauce that closely replicates what we would experience when we are in person together. So I think those moments where you can integrate live engagement through sessions or meetings or what have you, it's going to be beneficial. It's just, that is what we are all craving in it. And I had said at the beginning of COVID, that's part of the reason why we got so quickly into quarantine, is we are a society that thrives on community engagement, right?
Yeah.
So we need to kind of find those mechanisms that allow for that sense of community to come across. That's where we all thrive.
And Mike, how do you view it?
Well, I think there are a lot of similarities actually between the sort of strategic approach to a virtual event as there are to a live event. You want, clear goals and objectives, understand your audience, have some really strong communication, clear messaging. Networking, is the number one reason that people go to live events. I mean, there's those building your own network of people, opportunities, the hallway conversations, whatever you want to call them, the ad hoc conversations. Trying to create that environment, on a virtual platform is something we're striving really hard to do, and we've had some success with being able to schedule meetings with people that you can see are also at the event, and knowing who else is there and being able to identify them and reaching out to them. There's opt-in, there's opt-out, there's all these other gateways to that. But yeah, creating that sense of community is a great thing. From group chats, we've been doing a lot of group chats, to one-on-one chats within virtual events. They're all things that help create that access and that networking that everyone's looking for.
Do you think we can make up for the loss of elements of this emotive experience? Can we make up for it?
Well, technology's improving pretty quickly, and everyone who's already had a platform is improving their platform. Everyone is scrambling to create the next best thing, and there are some people in between. But I don't think, if you go back to Aristotle, a solitary life is for goats and gods, or whatever it was. But I think we're as a species we're innately meant to spend time with other people physically around us, and that's never going to be able to be replicated, I don't think, other than getting together. The excitement that you feel walking into a crowded keynote or a trade show floor, or a lot of what we have been doing in the past is to create environments that can't be recreated any other way. And that's how we judge our events as being good, is that you couldn't do this any other way than the way we've been doing it. So I think there's always, one of the things we're seeing is there will now always be this virtual amplification of live events. So when things are happening live, there will also be a virtual digital version of that. And we're seeing that, in the short term, we're seeing networking not being the thing. People can't go to live events. But so what is the next thing that's going to make people go to a live event? Is it to see the content, for the first time, just to see that amazing science, to learn the greatest, and maybe to meet one or two people? It's going to be a much more targeted, I think, group that go to live events. We're also seeing those live events being used as content generation engines. So if something is being presented there, rather than set a studio up, present it at the live event, capture that, and then distribute that through all the other channels, amplify that messaging. So that's going to be the next, I think, reason people will go to live events, if they allow that information to get out there. So,
Lisa, what have we missed here? You want to have the final word on that?
Well, again, I think we're feeling our way through this all, and we're doing what we can to replicate the reason that you get together in the first place. Again, networking, sure, there's some ways you can virtually accommodate that. You certainly can present content. We know that. We've done that even before COVID hit. We've been doing, web meetings for a long time, and webcasts and things, and, podcasts even for a long time. So you can impart clinical information. The real challenge, I think, for a lot of people is, I have a physical product. I don't have a software. I have a product that you want to touch. You want to see it. You want to get the size of the dimension of it and walk around it. How do we do that? Of course, there's great CAD programs that can allow you to pan, zoom, rotate, and, things like that can get you close, but just not quite. So, I think we're doing the best we can to think about the ways that or the objectives you have as a company going to a trade show or any kind of an event, and finding an alternative for that. The one that I mentioned last time when we talked about this is still true. As a smaller or mid-sized company, I strategically position my booth near a big guy like a Siemens. I'd be across the street from where Jeannie is so that I could get her overflow. I don't know how you replicate that. That's really got to be physical, I think, because I would want to see that there's a lot of traffic at her booth, and I would want to be there to capture people as they walk by, driven towards what she's got going on, and I catch them afterwards. I also think that there's that element, again, as a small exhibitor, and that's where I'm at in my stage of company development, that, I want to catch someone just sort of roaming, right? And there is no real true roaming that happens in this virtual world of the trade show. I mean, you have to pretty much purposefully click on something. It's not like you can just be at a booth and go, oh, there's next door, I'm going to go next door. It just doesn't work like that. And so I'm wondering how we'll get at that particular element for the smaller guy.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. I mean, when I've run sales and marketing for small, medium-sized organizations, I frequently send the sales team, I'll say, well, just go walk the aisles, see who you run into. Go out in the halls and, invite people to the booth. You can't, like you said, you can't do that.
That's a brilliant point too. That, the trade show floor is an incredible opportunity. I always have our teams with assignments, go check this booth out, go check that booth out. And you can still go check out the booths. That's not a problem, but you certainly can't observe what kind of traffic there is at that booth. How engaged are the physicians on that new product launch? That would never be visible to me anymore as a competitor. So that's another great point, is that we've lost that nuance too.
I think we're all forced to be more intentional in our approach than we've had to be for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And on that too,
Jeannie, go ahead, Mike.
Sorry, on that point too, I think it's been easy to be a voyeur to some extent, an anonymous voyeur in the trade show floor. You don't have to cross the threshold. You don't have to get your badge scanned. No one ever has to know you were there. But if you really want to see what's going on in that space, now you're going to have to give up that information. You're going to have, right. So that's another interesting, and talking about, PII and all those different GDPR issues, and there's a whole range of those things going on. Again, people are gonna have to be willing to give up more information if they want to have a quality engagement. They don't have another option at this point. So, big trend too.
So, Mike, one of the reasons you're here today is because Sparks is just famous for the platforms it delivers, and so you are making virtual exhibit platforms as a substitute for the actual platform, the actual exhibits. Is there a difference between meeting platforms, a meeting platform, and then we have the actual industry or the company's virtual platform? Have you noticed, and I'll ask the same of Jeannie here in a second, but have you noticed the difference between the platform that a society presents to a company and the kind of virtual platform or some of the strategies the company has to entertain to participate in it?
Sorry, you cut in and out there a little bit, but I think I got the
Okay.
question. I think there are multiple sort of solutions to any problem, and the scalability of that solution is something that's important. A lot of the associations are providing these platforms that are easier to manage. They're more generic in their offering. They have some more limitations. Some of the people who are doing the more one-off proprietary events are building a platform that suits their goals and objectives and their needs and has the functionality around that. So it's a much more targeted solution, and it is obviously less generic. There is more personalization. There is more opportunity to upload content. There's more opportunity to actually influence the ways people navigate through that information, versus the larger off-the-shelf platforms that a lot of the associations are using, because they're again, back to the reliability thing. They're tried and tested. They've been stress tested. They have their track record in place. The engagement itself may not be of the same quality, but they know at some point that it will work. So those are the differences we're seeing.
Okay. And then in terms of virtual exhibit platforms, you've got some competitors. How different are these platforms from each other? Like if ABC company was to go out and look at 2 or 3 offerings, how different are they?
There's a couple of different tiers, based on the products and the amount. And again, we're having to explore different skill sets to create this kind of virtual magic that we're creating, rather than traditional sort of 3D designers and architects. I mean, we have no gravity now. We have no material costs. We have no limits to the size and scope these things can be. We can have minotaurs and unicorns running around. If you extrapolate it, it goes in that direction. So we are sort of incorporating much more of a movie production kind of skill set, and animation and that kind of stuff, as well as the traditional sort of 3D design and content delivery mechanisms that we're used to. So it's a really liberating but scary time right now, because we're all having to adjust our skill sets to be able to produce environments that will keep people engaged for a reasonable amount of time.
And when you say there's different tiers, do you offer a couple of these different tiers?
Sure, we have tiers where you can, and again, it depends on the ability of our audience to be able to access the end product. So some of the products we're putting out there are web hosted. They're very light. They're very quick to download. Other people want a more high-end experience where it takes a little bit longer to download, but the actual interaction you have after that point is pretty amazing. We're doing things now with like game controllers, like an Xbox controller, so you can actually first person drive yourself through the space, click on anything you want. You have real people walking around you, other people walking around you. You never bump into each other because there's collision engines in there and that kind of stuff. It takes a little bit longer to develop, or you can sort of take even our approach though to a traditional trade show exhibit is a lot different, in that we used to have islands, right? Now we're basically building interiors, so you stand in the middle of the space, and it doesn't matter where you look, you're getting a brand message, or a product message. So it's a very different approach.
Okay. Okay. And we
Do you
talked
mind
earlier
if
about.
I
Go
chime
ahead.
in?
Sorry, Lisa.
This is where, Mike, I'm so excited to, have you all here, is to ask about, so I walk up to a booth and I walk inside the booth because, like you said, it's this environment. There's an interior to it, and I don't mind because I'm not physically doing it, so I don't feel trapped walking in the door. But I do. I come in the door and it's your booth. So there's people who can greet me at a reception counter. I can go up to a video and engage that. Are there any other real novelties that you're seeing on the horizon, developed yet or not, that are ways to engage? I mean, like you said, the whole idea of that virtual experience where I'm physically passing people who are real people, in this environment is cool. That's the first I've heard of that. I look forward to seeing it. But, engaging my physician in my booth, is there anything just like on the cutting edge of things that you could share?
Well, combining that virtual environment with a video conference like this, you can actually have a live hosted tour of the environment. So you can be with your customer, walking around the space together. You will both see the same thing on screen. Again, all the content's available, the videos, the presentations, and they can actually talk you through it. And as you have questions, you can address them. And one of the other things we're doing that sort of, again, talks to the device market is we actually have within this environment the ability to pick things up and turn them around 360 degrees. So you can actually look at something, you can zoom into it, you can zoom out from it. But that is now a possibility also.
Okay.
And links to, creating a great experience also sometimes includes creating links to other existing assets within that environment. So if there's you want to go deeper, you have that link to an existing site or other asset that you have, and then you can go deep into that particular piece of content. Being able to download and take away PDFs of literature, again, something we've been doing in our virtual environments also. There's a lot of different things, and just we always like to put in a few fun things. We've got butterflies that fly around. If you click on the butterfly, a random video comes up of one of our executives. Or one of the exhibits we did, we had a pigeon up in the rafters, and it has things saying, "Don't poke the pigeon." And then you poke. Obviously, everyone wants, because you're exploring, everyone wants to poke the pigeon. It's not cool at all. Anyway, so but putting those kind of moments in, like we do with our live events, those moments of unexpected, just fun, are things that people should be doing as well. It's business, but it's got to have a, if you're not laughing, you're crying. So it'll be fun.
Yeah, great.
So did we decide whether or not you could show us like a sort of a Sparks?
Sure.
The Sparks booth.
Sure, I'll show you the Sparks booth.
I think I permitted sharing.
Yep.
I love the butterflies.
That is a
What
really
great
cool idea.
And a pigeon.
Yeah, so here, you can see, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
So here, it starts, we always like to start with having a few tips. So, just again, it's intuitive to most people, but just to make sure everyone is understanding it. And then making things easy to access. So, we have these, what we call hotspots. This is the lighter version of the 3D stuff we're doing. But a couple of things to point out. So down in the bottom left here, we also have a menu-driven navigation piece as well.
Very nice.
Let me just try to see if I can go full screen here. And, as you roll over things, this takes you to our Get Back to Business website, for example, and you can go deep in this, and it's the fully functioning website. And it's in this, again, we're calling this an iframe that comes up. You can, on here, you can make appointments with these people. You can see what role they play in the company. So there's a lot of different things to explore. There's video content. Again, existing assets that will play with audio.
That's nice.
And it doesn't matter where I look, you know, I'm seeing a finished environment. If we go over here, I'll show you this, again, the ability to click on an object and then look at it, zoom in. I'm going to do it now. So zoom in and out. Yeah, we can actually look at it from any angle and put it back on the shelf. So again, if you were having a live tour with someone, or again, you're having just a Zoom meeting like this, and you're walking through it together, it's a very again, intuitive and fun way to navigate through the information. If we look at, you know, another thing we were playing with was this idea of scale. So I can actually go into this smaller exhibit, and now all the stuff in the background is kind of grayed out, so it's this other level of content. And with this one, again, we were looking at zooming in, and then a different way to interact with the information is if I just roll over it, it just starts automatically. So let's see if I can find the pigeon. He's up here somewhere.
No, don't mess with the pigeon.
There he is. Don't poke the
Oh, there's the pigeon.
Very cool.
Please, not again.
So this software package that creates this exhibit, this is actually very impressive, and it's the first time that I've been really brought into a virtual exhibit. So I guess you could probably have several different levels of templates and complexity that somebody can choose from.
Yeah, absolutely. The number of, you know, the amount of content you want to, the costs are driven by the number of sort of points of view you want to have, the number of these hotspots you want to have, obviously the amount of content you want uploaded into each one of these, you know, areas, the amount of interactivity. So if you want to be able to schedule appointments with people, that's kind of an added, you know, plug-in we have to put in there. And then, you know, obviously with healthcare, we have to be very careful about things like when you first land on this page, make sure you understand what class of drug you're looking at, for example, in the pharma industry. If it's a pipeline area, you know, there's a clear separation between all the same rules that apply to the physical world. So again, we've got some pretty novel ways of doing that, and I'd love to share the sort of stuff we've done, but again, it's all proprietary information and stuff that's not ready for the public domain yet. But yeah, it's a pretty sophisticated tool, and from here, you know, there's a range of options you can do as far as you can have this as a standalone piece. What we have found though is to embed this kind of 3D environment within a platform kind of approach where you know, this is part of the event platform that you're creating for a particular event or for trade show. So I'm going to stop sharing now.
Any idea, do you have any concept of, I mean, this is a really unfair question, of the cost of this? You know, so for example, let's say it's a small, medium-sized company. They want to have the ability to, and it's a diagnostic company with perhaps, maybe they've got 5 key instruments that they would like to be able to have somebody walk up to, click on it, and it would give that person the ability to do the 360, look around, whatever. Maybe the ability to pick up, you know, up to 10 different pieces of literature that they could download by visiting, and then a couple interaction one-on-one spots where they can actually communicate with a member of the company. How much is, I guess we probably also have to throw in, because it only makes sense, a couple video screens that perhaps explain the products. How much is a company looking at for something like that?
I mean, it's really a sliding scale, and I'm not gonna completely dodge the question. I will get there. Just bear with me. You know, obviously there's a cost to create the environment in the first place. So we're actually the same cost you would have to create any kind of trade show environment or event. There's a 3D designer, 2D designer, interactive guy sitting down, figuring out what goes where and how, and what the story is, and the messaging, and how that incorporates. So that cost pretty much stays the same as in real life. then on top of that is the level of interactivity. So how many videos, how much content, how many features do you want built into that? So you're looking in the $30,000 to $60,000 range, for a reasonable size presence. We've done things a lot less than that. We've done things a whole lot more than that also. So it's based on the functionality you want. If you wanted to create one of the things we do is proprietary events that are somewhat associated with existing associations or trade shows, but like we're doing for a lot of clients, again, outside of healthcare, but sometimes, for example, CES, we do have activations in Las Vegas at the same time that CES is going on that are not officially, linked to that particular thing. So you have the audience physically there. So if a company wanted to launch the latest and greatest news, and it happened to coincide with an association's event that was happening at that particular time, that's certainly something I don't see how they could regulate, as long as they're not affiliating themselves with that particular event in any way. And again, I'm sure that there'll be some more discussion around that and how ethical that is. But people are finding the right time to release their news. And one of the other examples we've done is, Natera wanted to just take this time to talk about and update everyone on the COVID situation to do with, organ transplants. And they had a town hall meeting where they created a custom event platform. They had some keynote speakers, but it was for patients and providers, partners to attend. And all they did was announce what was going on, because obviously with COVID, it makes the whole situation a lot more difficult to navigate in the transplant world, because it is so time sensitive. So I think that there's a lot of ways people are starting to look at virtual in a completely different way. There were a lot of events that were 3 intense days of content jammed together. 8 hours a day, you're at this thing. The fact of the matter is that we're all living this mixed reality where we're at home, we have things happening in our lives that we need to attend to. People are really only willing to sit in front of a computer for 45 minutes to an hour before they need to get up and take a break. So instead of doing 3 days of content, why can't we make it 3 weeks of content with an hour and a half each day, or an hour a day, and make it an episodic, longer time span? We don't have the cost of venue, we don't have the cost of staff, we don't have the cost of accommodation in a different place. So thinking about virtual events in a completely different way to the traditional way we think about time and space is something that people are starting to really dig into as well. It's just rethinking what an event needs to be.
So that brings me to a couple points. One is that if they've made this investment in this virtual exhibit, well, just like a hard exhibit, they have this virtual exhibit to keep. They could actually attach it to their website, so they could be using it. And I've seen companies do this. They can use it year round, so it becomes a bigger tool. And I'm sure that they could go in and change a point here or a point there. They just call you up and say, we need to change this video, or we need to change this product display, and here's what you need to do it. And if they get it, it's like changing out a countertop or something like that.
Yeah, a light panel. It's exactly like that. So we're creating these environments that we are, despite my mention of no gravity and minotaurs and unicorns, they want to represent the brand in the way the brand likes to be represented. So they do need to be somewhat familiar to people who already have a relationship with that brand. But yeah, updating content, rescaling, reducing. We can do things like limit sightlines too. So instead of it being a 360 degree, we can only see this portion. And again, depending on what the latest and greatest news is, we can swap that information in and out and really focus people's attention, again, like with a in real life exhibit, where we want their attention to be. So,
okay. And then as you started talking about, maybe we have an event that takes place over a week or 2 weeks instead of 2 or 3 days. that sort of brings us to the whole concept of what is the future going to be? Because we're hearing, and I've heard this really from Lisa first, and then we all talked about this last week as we're preparing, but things like a hub and spoke system, for example. So what do we think the future is going to be? Jeannie, you want to take a shot at that?
Well, I think you both have kind of have hit on it. I agree with Mike. The model of you're going 3 days, 8 hours a day hard, I think will evaporate. People are tired. It's a lot. We're trying to manage home and family in the background. So I think that goes away here probably pretty soon. And those schedules become more flexible and allows for a better balance. I think there's a lot of merit to hub and spoke overall, and overwhelmingly when you look at the various data reports that are out there, in particular in healthcare, the sentiment is not so positive on returning to these large controlled events. And it is our audience, right? It's physicians and clinicians, scientists. So they will probably gravitate more towards smaller events with a smaller dynamic. And this is where you can bring in elements of a bigger program virtually into that same live space. They're getting in their car and they're driving home. So there's no, how do I feed myself? Where am I staying? Is it clean? Do I have to rely on public transportation? All of those concerns are kind of mitigated. So I think, and Lisa mentioned this at the beginning of the call, in some states, those small events are happening. And from my Siemens life, I've seen that as well. We've had some chapter events where you're talking about 40, 50 people. Those are still happening. And I think that's going to become more and more popular. It's not a small effort to go from having a large beast of a program to saying, okay, we're going to have 10, regional shows or road shows, but it's worth exploring for sure.
And Mike, what are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, we're calling them decentralized events. You might have 6 major metropolitan cities across the United States all having the same event. The other thing to consider, I think, moving forward is the role of technology. Being able to broadcast that content from one location to another, capturing that content and keeping it, redistributing it, and even in the physical world, the role of technology is, we already talked about the UVC lights, the blue light technology that's happening. There's already name badges that beep when someone's within 6 feet. You know what I mean? There's going to be a lot of that sort of contact tracing stuff's going to be, again, the technology for that's improving. So I think there's going to be a lot of technology that makes live events possible to some extent. But I do believe the regional events, outdoor events, more open spaces, that's in air-conditioned convention centers. It's going to be cold, it's going to be hot, it's going to be windy, but you're going to get that content one way or another. So that return to less conditioned spaces, I think, is going to happen also. So we're seeing a lot of trends towards traveling shows, so mobile events. A lot of our clients are looking to, rather than go to a convention, is take their products to the customer, in some kind of mobile unit that allows for a small audience to be in there and schedule time and go from location to location. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, coming out of this, as well as obviously the limitations there.
And these smaller events allow for that heightened degree of personalization, right? Which has been a buzzword now in the industry for a while across all sectors, right? Whether that's through AI or what have you, your CRM. But the minute you scale down in terms of attendance, that becomes much more easy to do. And everything is about being a crafted experience. So it's kind of a moment where you can leverage that trend of we're creating these crafted experiences. And with Mike, that's what I expect to see, is it's going to have more of that feeling to it as we move forward.
Yeah, I think the cost, like you're saying, Jeannie, the cost per engagement is probably going to go up. But if it's the right people there and it's a targeted audience and it's personalized and it's an amazing thing, then the ROI will be there.
That's really interesting, because in the even years ago, with diagnostic devices, for example, we might do a road show. You go into a city and you get a suite and you have your sales reps schedule people to come in for small groups to see your technology, whatever it might be. And back then you might be successful, you might not, but I'm wondering now that the two of you have mentioned this, is it could be much more successful as the doctors have no other option, or healthcare providers, could be nurses. They don't have other options, and they do want to stay up to date. They do want to see their most recent technologies, and so they might be more likely now to attend something like that. So it could be a very good strategy.
Sure. I mean, when you think about it, right, RSNA, those mega shows are so successful because it's like the auto show for a physician or a radiologist.
Yeah.
It's the one time a year where they can go in and kick the tires on every model that's out there.
Yeah.
And there's not a replacement right now for that. But technology allows us to replicate that experience and literally bring it to your doorstep. So
in terms of alternatives, that's an alternative. Small events that are targeted. We talked about the webinars. We talked about what was it called? Eat and Engage, or Eat Engage?
Eat Engage, yeah.
Eat
EATENGAGE.
Okay, got it. Eat Engage, right.
Mm-hmm.
Talked about that. So those are some alternatives, and those then also become a deciding factor as to whether or not somebody wants to participate in a trade show. Should I spend money on these other alternatives instead of going to the trade show?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anything that I've missed that we should talk about? Lisa, can you think of something that we've missed here in our conversation?
Not really. It feels like we caught a lot of the things that we were intending to with our guests here. Yeah. Good
Excellent.
Perspective.
Well, thank you everybody for participating, and for listeners, if you saw some glitches or some freeze ups or whatever like that did occur, it's because we had these storms going through, and I'm sure that interfered with all the cyber communications that are involved in a Zoom meeting. But Jeannie and Mike, thanks so much for being here. Lisa, thank you for collaborating with me and helping to organize that. I really appreciate it very much.
You bet. Glad to be a part of it.
Thank you all. It was great to be here.
You bet. Nice to meet all of you too.
All right. Bye for now.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Well, that was very interesting. And again, I appreciate your patience with the poor video quality, but the content was good if you used your ears. And one thing we learned in this program is that to put together a virtual trade show exhibit is not something you can do in a couple weeks just because it's virtual and it's software. It takes the same amount of time as a brand new exhibit that you're starting from scratch. If you're going to make one in the pre-COVID world, make one out of booth materials and so on, something that is hardware that you're going to ship. So you really need to plan ahead and work with your vendors, companies like Sparks. In the show notes, you will find some really important links. First of all, you'll find the LinkedIn links to Jeannie, Mike, Lisa, and myself. You'll find a LinkedIn link or not a LinkedIn link, but you'll find a link to the website of the Healthcare Convention and Exhibitors Association if you want the appropriate person in your company to explore that further. You'll find a link to Sparks Marketing Corporation, and you'll also find a link to something that Lisa's team did, and they have a video blog, it's not very long, on the art of virtual meetings with some best practices. It's really excellent. Short, sweet, but good information. So I put a link in there for that as well. If you like this program, recommend it to a friend, forward it. If you like the podcast, you can subscribe to it at the website. There's a link to my website in the show notes. Again, thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great week, and go win your week.